Under former Information Minister Neil Parsonage, a well-placed source said the Trinidad Guardian was yesterday informed that Nicholas would be made press secretary in the office of the Prime Minister. Well, guess what? He went on to be press secretary. Then he went on to be High Commissioner to London. Then he went on to be Attorney General. All with 10 people in his party.
Good morning, Vasant, Bharat.
10 people he had, Vasant, not so?
Good morning.
Good morning, Vasant. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you guys?
Not too bad. It's been a while. Thank you so much for joining us on the Power Breakfast Show.
My pleasure.
I love that chair, though. Yeah, I'm going to come and pick up by your house, yes?
When I'm ready to pull it out, I'll let you know.
No problem. Sounds like a plan. Oh, welcome. Richard will join us shortly, though.
Okay.
Morning, Vasant Bharat.
Morning. How are you?
We're doing fine. We're doing just fine. You know,
I'm sure
I'll be seeing you at cricket soon.
Oh yes, for sure. I was hoping to play a bit, but they put off the playing of the cricket for the watching of the cricket. So I'll see you because you sit right close by me. So I'll see you.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, one of you all invite me.
That if the one is the one day that members can bring a guest for those international matches.
Yeah, that's true.
So much to talk about. Where do we start?
Where do you start?
Let's start with you've been Minister of Trade and Communication and Agriculture and Communication. Quite a number of portfolios. And you have a finance and economic background. What are your thoughts on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and information disseminated recently?
Well, I think, first of all, it is much of, a lot of what has been said in the press recently, it's a lack of knowledge, and it's to a certain degree a level of ignorance that a lot of people don't understand how sovereign funds work, and funds and investment funds in general work. I think we've got to go back to 2007 and understand that when the sovereign fund, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, was set up, there was what's called a strategic asset allocation that was determined by the then board as to being a balanced portfolio that would balance risk versus return. In other words, these monies belong to taxpayers, and you don't want to be investing in very risky funds, although they may bring back, obviously, higher returns. So an investment portfolio was determined, and I think that strategic asset allocation still remains till today. Now, what happened in 2022, and it wasn't just with our wealth fund, it was across the globe. So you see that if memory serves me correctly, when I read recently, it was the wealth funds of China, of Dubai, Norway in particular, suffered huge losses as a result of what was happening globally, as a direct result of COVID, and as a direct result, obviously, of what was happening in the Soviet bloc with Russia and Ukraine, and those led to certain unforeseen circumstances that tilted what would otherwise be relatively safe investments. And I'm talking here about U.S. Treasury stocks. I'm talking about safe, what would be deemed to be safe U.S. Equities, and some non-U.S. equities, particularly in Australia, Denmark, and so on. It tilted those stocks and investment vehicles, to investment assets, to the downward, to trend in a downward manner. And as a direct result, of course, because we were invested in those instruments, Trinidad and Tobago lost what was reported to be $913 million US. Now, taken out of context by people who don't know or tempting to just use it to their advantage, really and truly, they're misleading the population. And
well, was the
sending.
Express headline misleading in your opinion then?
What was the Express headline?
I think fund loses 900,000 or whatever it was.
Well, no, it was accurate. It was accurate at a point in time. And that point in time was at the end of the period ended 31st of September 2022. Of course, the fund has now recovered $500 million. So, you know, one would expect that if that situation were to persist, then it's something that would be cause for alarm in Trinidad and Tobago. But clearly that situation hasn't persisted, and the markets are looking now to correct itself. So I think that yes, it's something that we need to look at in future in terms of maybe we need to be looking now that we know. We need to be looking at the strategic asset portfolio allocation and determine whether it still serves our purpose, or whether we need to be relooking at other parts of the world outside of the US predominantly, which may be safer. So these are things that the board has to determine. Now remember that the board consists, and this is my one criticism here, the board consists of the chairman, who is Mr. Ewart Williams, the former central bank governor. It also consists of the current governor, the current deputy governor, also I think the PS and Ministry of Finance, Suzette Leachy, and one other person, Mr. Bevan Narayan Singh. Now, the day-to-day running of the fund is the responsibility of the central bank, and the central bank then employs what's called external managers because the central bank itself is not an expert in investment instruments. So they now employ external managers to look after the investment portfolio. My one issue here is that if the board consists of the governor and the current governor and the current deputy governor of the central bank, and the central bank itself is responsible for the day-to-day operations, it's himself unto himself. So in other words, it creates a lack of transparency, and particular lack of accountability, not necessarily transparency, but a lack of accountability, because the very same people who are responsible for the day-to-day running of the fund are the people to whom they report, which would be the board of governors. So I have an issue with that. I think that those responsibilities should be delegated. There should be a separation of those duties. But other than that, as I said, what is shocking to me, however, is that you know, the report, according to Mr. Imbert, was laid in Parliament on February the 3rd, and it is only now that the Express has divulged this information that the opposition has jumped on the matter. I mean, and this matter has been in the Parliament for 4 months, and they've not picked up on you know, what many people would perceive as an alarming loss. Certainly at that time, before the correction took place, the losses would have been you know, would have been large. So I find it strange that the opposition you know, did not pick up on a matter as what potentially could have been as grave as this.
Who does the opposition have shadowing finance anyway? I'm not even sure.
Isn't it Dave Tanku?
I think it's Mr. Tanku. But again, it comes back, and I've always said this. I mean, you know, if you put people who don't have the capacity or capability of you know, of looking after the interests of the population, but they only, you know, jump up and rah 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 at election time, then you're always going to get issues like this not being addressed, and again, not serving the country's interests.
Yeah.
Speaking, that's a great segue to your impressions of the political environment. Local government elections have been called. Mrs. Prasad-Bissessy has made several pronouncements. One, that the UNC is open to working with smaller political parties in a bid to unseat the PNM on August 14th and moving forward to 2025, and that she's nearing the end of her political career, and if and when she leads the party to victory, or the parties to victory in local and general elections, she'll pass the mantle off to someone who will quote unquote rise. What are your thoughts on, first of all, the opening of the spectre to involve other political parties, as was done in 2010?
But let me add to that. Let me add to that.
2015 and 2020.
Yeah. Let me add to that, Paul, in that she had said that the formula worked in 2010. Now that formula, Vasant, included yourself and Jack Warner. Is it that you all are also being invited to be part of this campaign to get rid of the PNM? Because that's where the campaign is, to get rid of the PNM.
First of all, let me say that a platform that is based primarily on getting rid of the PNM is not something that I could endorse, simply because, to me, to get rid of another party, you have to be better, and you have to position yourself as better. You cannot have a campaign essentially based on getting rid of the PNM for the sake of getting rid of the PNM. Getting rid of the PNM and replacing them with what is what the population is concerned about. And I think, with regard to, as a direct result, in my opinion, a desperate call for parties coming together. To me, that is quite a humiliation for the rank and file of the party to know that after 34 years of existence of a party that was in government, formed governments on its own at one point in time when Mr. Pandey was Prime Minister, I think it was back in 2000, have been in opposition now for 8 years. I think it's quite humiliating for the rank and file and the members of the party to have to go through the ignominy of its leader calling for, or almost begging for, small parties to get involved, because I think primarily they're unable to fill the 141 seats themselves. So I think it is a direct reflection on the leadership of the UNC that after 8 years of opposition, they have been unable to rally the country behind the cause of the UNC, and they're now having to, as I say, go cap in hand, begging small parties who we don't know. I mean, several I saw on the news last night suggesting that they want to have nothing to do with the UNC. But I think it must be a humiliating experience for the members of the party to know that after 8 years, they have done virtually nothing. I want to say virtually, I mean almost nothing in terms of...
But let me ask, did the coalition experiment work past getting in power in 2010? And do you think it has a prospect for working again?
No, it didn't work, because very shortly after, you see, there was really no intention in my, I mean, and I can say this after the fact, there was really no intention to maintain what I would call this partnership together. There was no intention of merging ideologies that could be long-lasting and sustainable. It was a political liaison of convenience to win an election. And to me, the population is completely fed up of these promises and these coalitions of convenience, which unfortunately ends always in a very disappointing manner for the population. I think if we are fair, this current government is very tired. I think they've run out of ideas. I think that they're just running on automatic at this point in time. A lot of the policies that they're putting out are knee-jerk and in reaction to how the population is feeling. But I still think the population, despite all of the hardships that they're going through, and despite all of the current disappointments, and despite all of the issues with regard to food prices and crime and the impending property tax and so on, I still think that they're fearful of any arrangement that the UNC gets involved in with other parties, because they genuinely, I think most people believe this is just a This is just old talk, and it's a coalition of convenience. And we know what Mrs. Bissessa's track record is with, much more significant entities like the COP and the MSJ and NJAP and so on in the past. So her getting together with, we don't know yet who it is, but we know that several people yesterday, I heard MSJ and I think PEP, and there may be one other who said that they were not willing to get involved. So I'm not quite sure who she's talking about at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it's not. I suppose the interesting issue with all of this, Vasant, is the fact that there is a track record that you just referenced with regard to the COP, and the COP was a disappointment, I think, for a lot of people who the third-party advocates, who generally is this group of roughly 200,000 plus, who at times become homeless or begrudgingly vote for either party. And I think the whole COP experiment by the UNC was a major disappointment, if not catastrophe, because the COP became a subset of the UNC. It did not retain any identity for the voters that it had in its corner.
And that makes it all the more difficult for coalitions or third parties to gain any traction, simply because of the past disappointments, not just with the COP, of course, but with the NER experience. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the UNC to form any credible, to put together any credible formula that can excite the populace. You see, Mrs. Bissessa and her team are of the opinion that people feel so disgruntled in the country today that they're basically going to hold their noses and vote for the UNC. And that's the reason why, over the last 8 years, the UNC has done nothing. They felt that just by sitting back, being lazy and incompetent, that eventually people are going to be so fed up of what exists that they will just basically hold their noses and vote for the UNC. And I refuse to. I refuse to be part of mediocrity, as I've said before, and I can't in any way support or encourage laziness or incompetence.
You just described a very dreary future. You said the UNC is lazy and incompetent and unimpressive, and you said the PNM is tired and uninnovative.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I think if you go around the country and you speak to people who are not tied in any way to party because of race, you will find that generally people are fed up of politics and fed up of politicians, and people have retreated into their own little space, protecting what they've got, whether it's from crime as a result of home invasions or going out late at night, or even going into you're at risk now even going into a grocery to shop because you don't know whether a bandit is going to be coming in behind you to rob the premises. People are really feeling the weight and heaviness of the cost of living, and I want to just mention this issue of the property tax again, because I think it's important in terms of not just the effect it will have on people, but I think the psychological weight that it carries on people who already feel a level of burden. You see, a lot of people feel that with property tax, it is only going to, and let me just say, I have nothing against property tax. I just feel that two issues I have. One, I think the timing is wrong. And secondly, I think there's some issues with regard to how it's going to be levied and on whom it's going to be levied that I have a problem with. But let me tackle the first one. People feel that property tax will only affect homeowners or people who rent, right? So in other words, it affects, I have a home, I have to pay property tax. And of course, if I'm renting and my landlord has to pay property tax, obviously he's going to pass that, or it's assumed he's going to pass that on to me as a renter. But remember that gas stations have to pay property tax. And what are they? The owners of those gas stations are going to pass it on to in the cost of the gas. Pharmacies have to pay property tax. They're going to be passed on in the cost of pharmaceuticals and drugs. Bookstores have to pay tax, property tax. Groceries have to pay property tax. So ultimately, what your taxi drivers, when in their home, have to pay property tax. So taxi drivers, for example, will be paying an additional amount for gas, and they'll be paying an additional amount for their car parts, and they'll be paying an additional amount in their homes. Who do you think is going to have to end up paying the additional or carrying the additional burden of that? It's going to be the consumer, who are already, in my opinion, weighed down by the cost of living, with the cost of food and so on. We know that. We've done very little with the agricultural sector, despite the Roadmap Committee recommendations. We're not growing any more food than we did pre-COVID. We've taken no cognizance of many of those recommendations that could easily have been implemented. We're still importing probably between 85 and 90% of what we consume. We seem to have learned no lessons from the supply chain issues in COVID, preparing ourselves in the eventuality of another disaster. So yeah, people are fed up. They just feel it's they and them alone. And look, you know what? We have no faith in politicians generally. A lot of young people, guys, are leaving Trinidad and Tobago because they see opportunities elsewhere. And I meet them on a regular basis. In fact, many of them call me for advice on not if they should go, but which country they should go to. So you know, we must stop comparing ourselves with the worst countries in the world, or the countries that are going through the worst crises in the world. I've just come back from Fiji. I'm doing a project in Fiji, and I was having lunch with the Deputy Prime Minister the day before I left, and he was talking about all the good things that was happening in Fiji. For example, last year they had 15.4% growth on the economy post-COVID. Their tourism sector is back up to 40% of 40% of their GDP, which is exactly what it was pre-COVID. And I have to tell you that they have nothing in terms of the the attractions that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Most of their beaches are black. In fact, I stayed at a resort where there were 7 or 8 major hotel chains there, thousands of people staying there. Nobody was in the water because the beach was black, but they went for the experience that the Fijians have created. You know, I've been back from Fiji maybe a month now, and there is not a single week that has passed by since that the Ministry of Tourism in Fiji has not contacted me about my experiences in Fiji to get feedback. So, you know, they've maintained their sugarcane industry. They crushed out 1 million tons of cane last year. Agriculture represents about 11% of their GDP. So we're having lunch and we're talking about all these good things. And I said to the Deputy Prime Minister, so what's the murder rate in Fiji this year? And this is the middle of May, right? And he looked at me as though I was from Mars. And, you know, I thought he didn't understand the question. So I said, what's the homicide rate in Fiji this year? And he said, Vasant, the homicide rate in Fiji this year is 0. I said 0? He said, yeah. As far as I'm aware, nobody has been murdered in Fiji this year. So we mustn't compare ourselves with the worst in the world. We must look at what exists. And I'll tell you, the people of Fiji, as some of you may know, are exactly the same people like us, right? Indians and Africans, people of Indian origin and African origin. So we have to understand culturally what we have become and where we're heading, what the future for our children and grandchildren are likely to be. And it's never too late to fix it. But you can only fix it with people of capacity and capability and competence. You're not going to fix it simply because I look like, you know, the leader of my party and you look like the leader of your party, and I get a seat or I get a position in local government. It can't be that. It can't continue like that.
As we go back to the local government issue, Vasant, do you believe that this overture by Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar is a large-ditch effort in terms of the hemorrhaging that has been happening in the party, with people publicly disassociating themselves from the party? Do you believe that's what it is?
Well, I met a young lady yesterday, actually, in the Tunapuna area, who is a UNC activist, and she asked if she could meet with me, and I said, fine. I was up in the area, and I said, I'll meet with her. I'll meet with you. And she declared to me that she's going to be fighting a seat in the Tunapuna Piaka Regional Corporation for the PNM.
Oh,
so
that's one I didn't know about.
So it is not. The hemorrhaging is happening, even though it may not be public. We know about the public ones because those are the people who we've heard about are public figures, and they've actually occupied positions of political importance with the United National Congress. But I think that there is a hemorrhaging at several levels within the party.
What does that speak to?
It speaks to poor leadership, and it speaks to the fact that many people feel that the UNC has not done anything, or certainly not done enough to excite the population to get back into office. And people are fed up of the political wilderness. And so therefore they're going to an organization that they believe may not necessarily be the best, but it's certainly better than what they're involved in currently. And it's just this level of hopelessness that people have, that look, at least if I join the PNM, I may not be able to fulfill my potential 100%. I may not be able to help people to the extent I really want to, but I would certainly be able to help them better if I'm in government than if I'm in continuous opposition.
Mrs. Pasar-Bissessar suggested, I think it's yesterday, that she may be nearing the end of her political career. She says, after victory, and I'm quoting from the newspaper here, in the upcoming 2 elections, local and general in 2025, one of the party members will rise to lead our great party, and I'll be able to rest. Do you think this is a sign that Mrs. Pasar-Bissessar realizes, as some have suggested, these 2 elections are political do or die for her? And are you surprised by this statement?
I'm not surprised by the statement, but I can guarantee you that she has no such intentions. She's saying that essentially to give people hope that something better is going to happen, but that's never going to happen. The reality is that Mrs. Bissessar's political career ended in 2015. It's just that she's not recognized it, or she's refused to accept it. And she's now clutching at straws to give people the impression that put her back in and somebody else will. Let me ask you something. Who is going to rise from amongst the lot that she has there, or the lot that she intends to continue to surround herself with? And whoever rises are never going to, from that lot, will never stand any. In fact, they'll stand a worse chance of getting into office than.
To me, the next in line, from what I've seen, maybe Dr. Munidal. I don't know.
But I rest my case.
Oh gosh. So you don't consider Anita Haynes a bright spark, Vasant?
Anita has been sidelined completely by the party, as have several people who will not retain their seats in the next general election. I think Anita has potential. I think she's. You see, a lot of the young people who have potential have been sidelined, and they've not been given the opportunity to really build themselves within the organizations and to get the kind of the experience that is necessary to lead an organization. You will see the people who get the exposure and the experience are the people who are totally incapable. But because of their undying loyalty to Mrs. Bissessar, you will always see them around her. You'll hardly ever see Anita Haynes around Mrs. Bissessar, but you'll see the Ratirans and the Padarats and the Khadija Amins and so on most present. So and if that's the future of the party, then the party has very little to offer the population.
Let's swim across the Tobago and the assembly and the turmoil of the last year, and most recently the audio tapes. Mr. Augustine finally, in some small measure, referenced the audio tape last evening in Fairfield, and it said, well, after some time, because the audio tape is out, if I'm not mistaken, at least 3 weeks now, which to me paints a kind of damning picture of a sinister plot using state funds. Do you think this has been handled well by Mr. Augustine, and what are the implications for the Tobago People's Party, I think it's called, moving forward?
It's regrettable because I think more than anything else, what the PDP at the time, or certainly Farley and Watson at the time, did was create a sense of, a great sense of hope for Tobago, in that, you know, this was a party of real Tobagonians looking to serve the interests of the people of Tobago. And it wasn't really a Trinidad party looking to involve itself in the business of the people of Tobago. So I think it must be extremely disappointing. And I've not been, I mean, I think you guys know I have a home in Tobago, had for many years. I've not been to Tobago for a couple of months, so I don't know what the mood on the ground is, but it must be extremely disappointing. And of course, people who openly supported the PDP, the then PDP, and subsequently supported Farley and his team when they became independent. People like Dr. Valence James have come out now openly and said that they have to step down. So although Farley and they may have been able to sidestep and maneuver the whole issue of becoming independents and moving away from the PDP, I think this latest issue, and worst of all, not having responded to it in a timely manner, has caused them a great deal of damage. And I think if, I suspect that they said nothing about it in the last month because they were hoping it would go away. But of course, the noise has become increasingly difficult for him to not say anything. And the voices in opposition to him saying nothing have become louder and more prominent. So he's been, I'm not sure, I didn't hear what he said last night, but I think that they've been damaged. And whether they've been damaged irreparably, I can't say, but I suspect if an election were called tomorrow, the race would be a lot closer than it was in the last time around.
Do you think the PNM has done enough in Tobago, given the abject rejection, 14-1, of the then Tracy Davidson Celestin led?
Well, it would have been Tracy Davidson Celestin lead the campaign, but Ansel Dennis would have been the chief secretary.
Yeah, well, the council at that time, because it was an abject rejection of the PNM for many different reasons. Has the PNM done enough to, in the context of what has happened in the last year, of what Tobago voted for and more than likely didn't get, you know, from what people are seeing with the turmoil and the changes and the discord and now the audio tape? Is there a shift in political dynamic that can benefit the PNM or any other party that offers itself in Tobago, for that matter?
I think there'll be a shift in the political dynamics, not because of what the PNM has done in the last year, but what Farley and they have done. They've damaged themselves. The PNM really didn't have to do much, and I don't think they have done much in Tobago. And let's be honest, they're in opposition, so all they can do is to bring to the fore the issues. But I don't think they, in light of what has happened and the I guess, you know, the tumult that has taken place with the PDP, with first of all the impasse between Watson Duke and Farley, and then the splitting up and so on. I think that group has damaged themselves significantly without the PNM having to do anything. So, but I think the political dynamics have shifted away from what took place a year ago when they won, you know, what is it, 14-1 or 13-1 or whatever it is.
14-1.
14-1. I think it's a different political environment today, and you know, it's whether we like the PNM or not. To me, I've always said, and you guys always understand, have always heard me say this. It really doesn't matter to me whether it's PNM or UNC or COP. At the end of the day, it's the institutions that are created and the service and quality of life that it provides to the people that matter, and the leadership and the governance issues, right? So it doesn't matter to me whether it's PNM or UNC or COP or any other party. once the people of the country are able to lead and live a better quality of life, with every successive government that takes over, the quality of life, you can measure and say, you know what, my quality of life today is significantly better than it was last month or last year. And I can see hope that things are going to get progressively better. And if things have been bad because there are things that have been outside of our control, like COVID was, at least I know my government has a plan in place, and it has the quality of people to continue to deliver those services, despite the fact that we've had some difficult circumstances to deal with. That's what people really want to know. I mean, ultimately, of course, you're going to get a group of people on either side who are going to support a political organization, regardless of what happens. And that's not just Trinidad and Tobago, that's in the United Kingdom, that's in the United States, and so on. But the general grouping of people, the people who actually cause elections to be won or lost, they think about the country and they think about themselves, they think about their families, they think about the futures. And that's what's important. So in situations like these, people always go back to what they know if what they have invested in doesn't work. And ultimately, they've invested they've invested a lot of hope in what was then the PDP and now the TPT or whatever it is. And their hopes have been dashed. And so therefore, the natural inclination is to go back to the default.
Yeah. The leader of the PDP, Vasant, Watson Duke, has proffered himself as the next mayor of Port of Spain and is in fact, I guess, actively pursuing an election campaign in the city. What do you think of his chances?
I would like to say nil, but our problem is because we're dealing with two issues here, in my opinion. You have this level of populism that is sweeping the world. You have this issue of alternative facts and alternative truths that is sweeping the world and gaining levels of popularity. You have this situation where people, regardless of whether something is true or not, they will say it and hope that it sticks. And on the other side, you have this sense of hopelessness with people who have been marginalized for whatever reason. And you also have, in my opinion, a growing number of people who are uninformed because of their lack of education and because of their lack of economic and social standing. And you will find that those are the kinds of people traditionally who would be influenced by people like Mr. Duke. And I don't know if we in this country are doing enough to drag those people out of their current economic and social state and to show them that a better quality of life is possible for them. A more, I don't know, I don't want to use the word decent, but I think, you know, we've moved away as a society from a level of decency where we see our leaders being very irresponsible in what they say and how they behave. And we believe we can do exactly the same thing and get away with it. And I don't think it's a good sign for where we're heading as a country. And some kind of intervention needs to be made before it becomes too late.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the third-party entities that we referenced before that Mrs. Salvi Sase would have sent an open invitation to the Gary Griffith National Transformation Alliance, the PEPs? I see Hope with, I see a party called Hope with, let me make sure I say it specifically, a party called Hope with Timothy Hamlet-Smith, Denise Deming, Karen Nunes Teixeira, and the PDP also campaigning in Trinidad. What are the prospects for those? It takes a while for political parties to establish themselves and build momentum. What do you think their prospects are in local and potentially in general in 2025?
Well, I don't think that these parties would have much chance in, I don't even want to use the word hope because I don't want to align it to the party you just called, but I don't think that these parties would have significant opportunities to show any success in local government elections. I mean, as you rightly say, parties have to have some kind of a track record. They have to build a level of excitement with the population to be able to get their votes. And I think if I'm reading this correctly, I think that most people are just really fed up, and I think a lot of people just will not bother to go out and vote. I think people are unexcited by the offerings that we have, and I think you will find that the majority of people who go out to vote are people who are attached in one way or another to either.
But let me put for an example. Yes. They may not win, but let's take St. Joseph, for example, where Minister Dayal Singh only won by about 800 or 900 votes. And the UNC had put up a relatively unknown candidate in Aloy Hunt, and the outcome was the outcome. Minister Dayal Singh won, but not by a large margin. And the prospect of the third party like Gary Griffiths or PP going in that constituency and battling also there, who do you think stands to benefit more from that, with them, if not victorious, as a potential spoiler?
You're talking about a general election now?
General election, yeah.
Gary's, I think people liked Gary Griffith as Commissioner of Police. Whether or not they see him as someone who can lead the country because of his narrow focus on the issue of national security and his very narrow focus on the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security. Whether they perceive that he has the ability or the capability to deal with other issues, other significant issues in the country, like healthcare, education, infrastructure, and so on, I think that's doubtful. So you may get a what I would call a protest vote against the incumbent, but I think that primarily the people who would come out and vote for a third party in a constituency like Tunapuna or San Fernando West or St. Joseph are primarily the people who would hold their noses and vote against the PNM and vote for the UNC. So in a situation like that, I think it would be the UNC who would suffer if a third party were to fight in any of those constituencies.
Mm-hmm. So he won't be able to take PNM votes. He more than likely will take anti-PNM votes from the UNC.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah.
Interesting. Right. Interesting times ahead, Vasant.
Because if you look at the voting patterns in those constituencies, mm-hmm. you, as you rightly say, in many instances you're talking about 800 to 1,000 people, and either those people who actually make the difference, they would either stay away from the voting process, or they would normally go and vote against the PNM. And so therefore, if they see an alternative that may very well just be a protest vote for them, they probably just go and vote for that alternative.
Thank you so much for being with us. As per usual, we'd like to hear your perspective, and stay safe.
Always my pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, Vasant Bharat, for being with us this morning. All the best. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care. All right. It is exactly 8 o'clock on the 14th day of June, 2 months again for local government election. It's a love day. Avi, it's the 14th of June. It's a love day. I get a roll of the eye. I don't know what that means. Let's get into the news.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital. Former People's Partnership Trade Minister Vasant Bharat says the UNC begging small parties to form a coalition with them is a humiliation. Speaking on Power 102 Digital's Power Breakfast show this morning, he said members of the party must feel humiliated given that they seem unlikely to unseat the PNM in an election. Mr. Bharat accused the UNC of being mediocre, lazy and incompetent and attempting to convince people to hold their nose as the PNM while not doing enough to prove that they can be a competent alternative. He claimed that the UNC cannot win an election only by attempting to convince people to get rid of the PNM and suggested that the UNC focus instead on placing themselves as a viable alternative. Meanwhile, the UNC political leader, Kamla Prasad-Basasa, has suggested that she's nearing the end of her political career. The 71-year-old opposition leader told supporters on Monday night that she's on the home stretch of her political career. However, she vowed to beat the governing People's National Movement in the August 14th local government election and then in the 2025 general election before taking her leave. Basant-Basasa said that after victory at the two elections to be faced within the next 2 years, one of the other party members will rise to lead their great party and she will be able to rest. Chief Secretary Farley Augustine says he's confident that he will be cleared of any wrongdoing when he does address the controversial audio recording which was recently leaked on social media. In the recording, two persons are heard discussing paying persons full-time through the THA to